Although I indulged in every manner of folly and nonsense in my lifetime, heaven seems not to have punished me as yet. Here I am, 42, sound of health and without a scratch on my body. Some of my friends were beaten to death, others vanished without a trace or suffered one fate or another. I must have been born under a lucky star, the way I did whatever I pleased. No other samurai with such a low stipend spent money as I did, and how I blustered and swaggered around with a trail of followers at my beck and call. I wore kimonos of imported silk and fine fabrics that were beyond the reach of most people. I ate my fill of good food, and all my life I bought as many prostitutes as I liked. I lived life fully. Only recently have I come to my senses and begun to act more like a human being. I have no learning to speak of, having taught myself to write only in my 20s, and barely enough to cover my own needs at that. My friends were all bad, and none good. Unable to distinguish between right and wrong, I took my excesses as the behaviour of heroes and brave men. In everything, I was misguided, and I will never know how much anguish I caused my relatives, parents, wife, and children. Even more reprehensible, I behaved most disloyally to my lord and master the shogun, and with uttermost defiance to my superiors. Thus did I finally bring myself to this low estate. When I think of my past, my hair stands on end. He who would call himself a man would do well not to imitate my ways. Gambaru is a Japanese phrase that means to work hard and slog on through tough times. And though the ability to persevere and power through is admirable, sometimes it's a good idea to take a break and reflect. This video is a paid partnership with BetterHelp, and they are the world's largest therapy service. With BetterHelp, you can instantly tap into a network of over 30,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues, whether you've been focused on Gambaru or not. It is great for our busy lives. You can schedule live sessions when it's convenient for you, and if your therapist isn't the right fit for any reason, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you get the same professionalism and quality you expect from in-office therapy, and at a more affordable price. So get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/voices of the past, and I've also linked them below in the description. Thanks to BetterHelp for supporting history content on YouTube. There can't be many in the world as foolish as I am. I was the child of my father's concubine. She fell out of favour with him, and I was taken in by my father's wife. I think of her as my real mother, and put under the care of a wet nurse. I was naughty from the time I was little, and made life difficult for my mother, and with my father away at his office every day, I acted up and was so headstrong that all were at their wits' end. We lived in the Aburahuri section of Fukugawa. In the garden there was an ornamental pond that was filled with water drawn from one of the nearby canals. During the summer, I would swim in it every day. My mother suffered from palsy and had trouble getting around. The rest of the household was also female. I looked down on all of them and spent my days getting into one kind of mischief or another. When I was 5, I took part in a kite fight against Kokichi, the son of a labourer in Meicho. Kokichi, who was older by about 3 years, seized my kite, smashed it and took away the string. I picked up a jagged rock and, grabbing hold of the collar of his kimono, hit him in the face. Blood came spurting out of his mangled lips, and Kokichi began bawling. My father happened to see this from over the garden fence. He sent one of his men to fetch me home. "What do you mean?" he said angrily, "hurting someone's child like that? You can't be left unpunished." He tied me to one of the posts in the veranda and whacked me on the head with a wooden clog. To this day, I have a bald spot and a dent where he struck me. The razor gets caught and nicks the skin whenever I have my head shaved, and each time I'm reminded of that Kokichi. I was adopted by the Katsu family when I was 7. My age was officially given as 17, and the hair at the front of my head was cut off accordingly. As part of the adoption procedure, Ishikawa Ukon no Shogen, the commissioner of my unit, and his assistant, Obi Daishichiro, came to the house. "How old are you, and what is your name?" Ishikawa asked. My name is Kokichi, and I am 17. Ishikawa pretended to be taken aback. Well, for 17 you certainly look old. He burst out laughing. I got into another fight over a kite, again with some boys from Meicho. There must have been 20 or 30 of them. I took them on alone, hitting and punching, but they finally got the better of me. My hair had fallen loose all over my face, and I was sobbing. I took out my short sword and slashed left and right, but I knew I was beaten and decided then and there to commit harikiri. I stripped to the waist and sat down on the rock. As it so happened, a rice dealer by the name of Shirakoya was standing nearby. He talked me into giving up the idea and took me home. After this, though, all the boys in the neighborhood became my followers. I was 7 at the time. When I was 9, my father took me to take judo lessons with Suzuki Seibei, a relative of the Katsu family in Yokohama-cho. I behaved myself at first, but soon got into mischief. My fellow students strongly disliked me and ganged up against me all the time. On the day that an all-night midwinter session was to be held, we received permission from the teacher to bring food. We took a break at midnight. I'd packed a lacquer box full of bean jam cakes and had been looking forward all day to this moment when we would share the food. But my classmates had other plans. They got together and tied me up with an obi, hoisted me to one of the rafters and began eating, even helping themselves to the cakes. So I pissed on their heads, spraying the food that had been spread out, and naturally, everything had to be thrown away. Serve them right, too. When I was 11, I became a student of Udono Jinzemon, a swordmaster in Surugadai. I liked the fact that Udono exclusively taught the technique for the wooden sword, and I practiced diligently. The son of Ishikawa Ukan no Shogen, my commissioner, was also in my class. He knew all about me, how much my stipend was and so forth, and taunted me in front of the other students at every opportunity. Katsu, what's your stipend? A measly 40 bales of rice? Ha ha ha. Since he was the commissioner's son, I kept quiet. But he continued to make fun of me. So one day I hit him good and hard with my wooden sword, cursed him out, and left him blubbering. When I was 12, my brother Hikoshiro arranged for me to begin school. He took me to the Shogunate Academy in Yoshima. I began by studying the Chinese classic, The Greater Learning. At most, I learned to read about 5 or 6 pages of The Greater Learning. The 2 teachers soon sent word that they didn't want me, which suited me just fine. And so I did nothing but ride, and with my money all gone, I began stealing from my mother's money and the cash she had set aside for emergencies. My brother was away in Shinano at the time on a 5-year assignment as district administrator. When he heard that I was spending all my time and money on riding, he ordered me to give up lessons and sent a letter to my teacher giving notice. He also scolded me severely and told me to stay at home. For a while, I couldn't leave the house. And what a pain that was. I was 14. I made up my mind to run away to the Kyoto area and stay there for the rest of my life. After all, I thought, no matter what a man puts his hand to, he'll always be able to eat. On the 28th day of the 5th month, I put on a pair of trousers over my kimono and set off. I didn't know a thing about the world, and as for money, I had only the 7 or 8 gold ryu I had stolen and tucked in the band I wrapped around my stomach. Asking directions along the way, I got as far as Shinagawa. I was lonely and frightened, but I pressed on and stayed the night at an inn in Fujisawa. The next morning I woke up and walked around aimlessly, wondering what to do. 2 tradesmen caught up with me. "Where are you heading?" they asked. "Nowhere in particular," I said. "Maybe someplace near Kyoto?" "Come along with us. We're going that way too." Taking heart, I went with them to Odawara. That night at the inn, they said, "Tomorrow we'll be passing through the barrier station at Hakone. Have you got a travel permit?" I never heard of such a thing. "Give us 200 coppers, and we'll get one for you." I did as they said and was let through the barrier station the next day. All along I remained on my guard, but by the time we stopped at Hamamatsu for the night, I felt I could trust them since they'd taken such good care of me. So before going to sleep, I took off all my clothes. In the morning, however, when I woke up and looked at my pillow, I saw that everything was gone, During the night, they had stolen my kimono, my pair of swords, and the stomach band containing my money. I was stunned. I asked the innkeeper if he had seen the two men. He said, "Oh, they said they were going on ahead to be in time for a festival at Tsushima Shrine in Owari, and that you were to catch up?" Completely overcome, I burst into tears. The kind innkeeper tried to console me. You know what they were? Flies on sesame seeds, thieves that play on travellers. And here I thought they were your companions from Edo. What a shame. Where will you go now? I'm not sure. I was thinking of going somewhere near Kyoto. Yes, but what can you do with only an underrobe to your name? The innkeeper was at a loss too, but then he disappeared for a minute and returned with a big ladle. Well, he said, you're not the only one from Edo who's been robbed on this road. Here, take this, and go to the neighbourhood of Hamamatsu Castle and see if you can't beg for a coin or two. I got up my courage and spent the whole day begging. By evening, I'd received about a peck of rice and wheat and 120 or 130 copper pennies. The innkeeper was a good-hearted man and put me up for the night. The following day, he said, it might not be a bad idea if you first went to Issei's shrine and prayed for your well-being. I gave him half of the grain and 50 coppers as a token of my gratitude and headed for Issei. During the day, I begged for alms, and after dark, I sought shelter in pine groves, on riverbanks, and in roadside shrines. Swarms of mosquitoes prevented me from sleeping, and believe me, that was no fun. One night, I slept by a big pile of rocks just inside the entrance to a riding ground near Fuchu Castle. The riding ground bordered on a bamboo grove, and beyond that stood a temple with the shogun's crest on its main gate. Early in the morning, I was awakened by 14 or 15 samurai who had come to practice riding. They galloped around with an air of fierce determination, but I could tell right away that none of them was any good. As I got up, a couple of the stable boys spotted me and began shouting, "Look, a beggar boy! The nerve of him, sleeping here!" I mumbled some excuses and stayed where I was, squatting on my heels. But the men were so hopelessly clumsy that I couldn't help laughing out loud. The stable boys were indignant. They set on me with their fists and after knocking me down, dragged me out of the riding ground. A samurai who was about 40 came over. "Hey you, beggar boy," he said. "How does a kid like you criticize samurai for the way they ride? Where are you from anyway? Come on, speak up." "I'm from Edo, and I'll have you know I wasn't always a beggar. Do you like horses? Well, let's see you ride then." Clad only in my underrobe, I showed them a thing or two about riding. Everyone was impressed and said to one another, "This wretch must be the son of a samurai." The samurai who had spoken to me earlier said, "Come home with me, and I'll give you a meal." So, after the practice ended, I followed him to his home. He was on a side street near the residence of the Fuchu town magistrate. He told me to wait, and soon came out with a tray piled high with rice and soup. It was delicious. He came to the kitchen afterwards and asked me my name and who my parents were. When I put him off with some lies, he said, "I really feel sorry for you. Stay with us." He gave me a kimono and had his wife arrange my hair and fill a bucket with hot water for me to wash up with. The two just couldn't get enough of me. That night, he called me into the living room and questioned me once more about my background. I lied again. I stayed for 6 or 7 days, and the entire time the samurai and his wife looked after me as though I was their own child. I had different plans, however. What good was it, making do in a house like this when I could just as well go to Kyoto and become a retainer in some nobleman's house? And so one evening, I changed into my old underrobe, and after folding my kimono and obi neatly by the quilts, I slipped out of the house. I got up before sunrise, and I ran as fast as I could towards Kyoto. I wandered for several days begging, and at Yokkaichi bumped into Murata, a beggar I knew. We bought food and stretched out on the floor of a pine grove. We talked of all that had happened since we'd last seen each other, and spent the night side by side on a bed of pine needles. You've got to admit, the friendship between beggars is something special. I wandered listlessly for several days. One night, I've forgotten where, I lay down near a cliff and somehow fell off the edge in my sleep. I must have passed out too. When I regained consciousness the next morning, I realised I had hit my testicles against a sharp rock. was too painful to walk. I got better little by little, and by the third day was able to walk around gingerly. By the time I reached Hakone, however, my testicles had become swollen and were beginning to ooze pus. It had been 4 months since I'd run away, and here I was, a samurai, wasting my time on things that would never lead to anything. I made up my mind to return to Edo and face whatever punishment my father had in store. Everyone was excited. Kokichi's come back! Kokichi's come back! I went to my room and slept for 10 days straight. I was told that in my absence the family had offered up all kinds of prayers and incantations, and had even sent a cousin, a nun called Kaizan, all the way to Kyoto to look for me. A doctor was sent for. After examining me, he said, "Now, is there something you want to tell me about yourself below the waist?" My testicles were still in bad shape, but I stubbornly denied any trouble. Within 3 months, however, they had become so infected that I could no longer move about. I had to stay at home for the next 2 years. My father reported my return to the commissioner, Ishikawa Ukon no Shogen. "It is indeed a shameful turn of events," my father said. "I will see to it that Kokichi retires, and that someone is adopted to replace him as head of the Katsu family." But Ishikawa disagreed. If Kokichi hadn't returned by the end of the month, I would have taken measures to end the family line. But he's come back, and all's well that ends well. Leave him be. By the time he's older, he will no doubt have mended his ways and will be able to perform some useful service. For now, take good care of him. All concerned were mightily relieved, I was told. Every morning I put on my katageno and hakama and made the rounds of the powers that be. I went to the commissioner's home in Akasaka Koichigai Soto and begged him to recommend me for a post. I even submitted a list of the misdeeds I had committed, adding a request that I be considered now that I had repented. An agent came from his office one day. He said, "Be forewarned that we will be sending out investigators to gather information on you." I waited expectantly. The commissioner spoke to me one morning. "Your followers simply refuse to tell on you, and though you've confessed everything, we find upon investigating that the mischief you've done is far more serious than you say. Be that as it may, you have repented, and that's good enough for me. I will do my best to get you an appointment. Continue to report diligently." I showed up at his residence with renewed fervour and practiced fencing in my spare time. Often enough, my name was entered onto the rolls of candidates, but not once was I given a post, and that I found very galling. I was anxious to find official employment, but I also had to dash around making money. Then my father died, and I lost heart completely. His death was entirely unexpected. It seems he'd had a stroke. I was giving fencing lessons at Mazuki Inari Shrine when one of his young retainers came running with the news. I raced to my father's place, but it was too late. I stayed on, helping out, and left the following morning. The next few days were taken up with my father's affairs. My own son was then 5. I went back to my business as soon as the mourning period of 49 days was completed. It then seemed like a good idea to form a sword association, in which members would pay dues and take turns buying a sword. I invited my fellow swordsmen and friends to join, along with Hosokawa Chikara Masayoshi, Minobi Taikei Naotane, Kobayashi Shinpei, and all the other sword appraisers in business. One day I went to the shogunate prison in Senju and tested my sword on the corpses of criminals who had been executed. After that I became a student of Asuemon and learned how to lop off the heads of corpses with a single stroke. My new landlord, Okano Magoichiro, was a rake and a spendthrift. He owed 17 ryu to a tea house in the Yoshiwara, and unable to pay, was being threatened with a lawsuit. He came to see me. I'd just moved in and in my ignorance got together some cash for him. But Okano got into debt again, having obtained 70 ryu at 5% interest a month to buy a prostitute out of her contract. The trouble was, as security, he had handed over the ledger recording the payment of rice taxes by his fiefs. The retainers at home and on his fiefs came to me for advice. I got back the document by putting up as security swords and other goods. My landlord, however, made no move to help me get my goods back. I eventually retrieved them one by one, but from then on I was always hard-pressed for cash, and with all my social obligations it was an awful nuisance. For a while I managed to survive by selling what I had left, but I soon ran out of goods and was forced to sell my own possessions. I hated parting with them. I'd collected them painstakingly over the years, but what else was I to do? I sold off every single item, and at half the original cost. I went back immediately to my sword business. Every night I went to the second-hand goods market in Kanda and Honjo, and being a pretty sharp bargainer, I soon set aside a tidy sum. Many of the friends I had helped in times of trouble came to me when they had swords to sell, but since they were not knowledgeable about swords, I never made a loss. One day at Sanotsuchiya, I got into a big fight with Kuma, the son of an employee at the copper mint in Hashiba. We were on the second floor, so I picked up Kuma and threw him down the stairs. He had to be carried home by some man who came running from the mint. But a while later, about 30 men appeared with hooked spears. They began surrounding the house. I flung off my outer garments, hitched up the hem of my kimono, and rushed outside, swinging my sword. I forced the men to retreat 200 or 300 yards, but just then a band of men arrived from the local patrol office to break up the fight. After this, even the crones and shrews who were hired to escort customers to the brothels drew away as soon as they saw me. There were scores of other adventures, but they took place so long ago, I've all but forgotten them. Both of my older brothers kept a close watch on me. I couldn't care less, and passed my days carousing to my heart's content. For the last 3 or 4 years I had fallen into dissolute ways, and had been spending most of my time in the Yoshiwara. So much so that the roughnecks who prowled through the quarters had become my underlings, and no one dared defy me. Naturally, this took huge amounts of money, but I was determined not to fall into debt, and so I hustled every night at the markets. One night in the summer, I was summoned to Hikoshiro's house in Kamizawa-cho. At my brother's house, everyone was in tears. His wife took me to Shintaro's room and said, "Kokichi, why do you persist in behaving so recklessly? Your brother has made inquiries about you here and there, and worried that you might do something truly dreadful. So he's decided to lock you up in a cage." Shintaro and the rest of us tried to talk him out of it, but he wouldn't listen. The cage was finished yesterday. It's in the garden. I went out to the garden. The cage was sturdily built with double enclosures. I said to Shintaro and my sister-in-law, "I appreciate my brother's concern. I've already made up my mind to stay in the cage for good, and not to come out even if I'm forgiven. You see, around where I live in Honjo, I'm well known and regarded as a hero of sorts. But after a humiliation like this, I could never show my face to my fellow man. I will fast and die as soon as possible." My sister-in-law pleaded with me, "Now that things have come to this, please turn over a new leaf." What sense would there be if I did? Ever since my father died, I've had no one to turn to, and as for any hope of obtaining office, I gave that up a long time ago. I decided I might as well do what I want and die. I really think it would be better if I went in the cage. "Couldn't you at least go home and talk it over with your wife?" "That won't be necessary. As I said, I'm not at all worried about my family. Rintaro is 16. He'd be better off if I was dead. If I lived too long, I'd only be a nuisance." My sister-in-law insisted that I go home for the time being. I went home and waited. At 8, I had still received no word, so I took off for the Yoshiwara and stayed for the night. Shintaro urged me to write a letter of apology to my brother. He'll have to be appeased one way or another. I couldn't be bothered. Then I heard that my sister-in-law, worried sick, was going from temple to temple asking for prayers on my behalf. I decided to put her mind at rest once and for all. The following spring, I passed on the family headship to Rintaro. I was 37. My past conduct truly fills me with horror. I am most fortunate in having a filial and obedient son. My daughters, too, are very devoted. My wife has never gone against my wishes. I am altogether satisfied to have lived until now without any serious mishap. At 42, I have understood for the first time what it means to follow in the path of righteousness, to serve one's Lord and one's Father, to live with one's kinsman in harmony, and to have compassion and love for one's wife, children, and servants. Let my children, their children, and their children's children read this record carefully and savor its meaning. So be it.